Zelos Podcast is sponsored by Kinetic IQ, where intelligence meets motion. Kinetic IQ brings a biomechanics lab into the palm of your hand, letting you measure movement anytime, anywhere, with just an iPad or an iPhone, and no wearables required. I've been using Kinetic IQ's markerless motion capture in my own practice, and whether you're screening athletes, analyzing posture and gait mechanics, optimizing performance, or guiding return to play, it helps practitioners like us save time, capture more objective data, and make instant actionable decisions. So to learn more about how Kinetic IQ is shaping the future of intelligent movement, visit them at kineticiq.com. That's KINETIKIQ.com. You know, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have Metabolic Elite be one of the sponsors of the Zelos Podcast. You know what makes Metabolic Elite different is their commitment to real results. I've seen a lot of supplements and performance enhancement things over the years, but they pair clinical experience with innovation, like Lipitab, their proprietary solid-state liposomal delivery system. It's a chewable format which enhances absorption, like nutrients like BPC 157 and synapses. They're delivered more efficiently in the body, supporting recovery, focus, cognitive health. Their formulas go beyond the basics, solving performance health challenges at the system level. Every product is tested for quality, it's backed by research, and trusted by athletes and clinicians alike. So learn more at metabolicelite.co. And you can get 10% off all of Metabolic Elite products by entering the coupon code ZELOS, Z-E-L-O-S. Welcome to the Zelos Podcast, the show that's all about the pros behind the pros in sports. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, my guest is Alan Nasypany. He is the Doctor of Athletic Training at the University of Idaho. He has been heading up their athletic training department for a number of years. We were having a conversation on the phone not too long ago, and I just had to have him on. We're going to go into and outside conventional, non-conventional ideas of training and rehab and so on. Before we get underway, speaking of rehab and performance, the Perform Better 3-day functional training summit's coming your way. In Chicago, it'll be June 18th to the 20th. Long Beach, California, July 9th to the 11th. And finishing in Providence, Rhode Island, August 20th to the 22nd. Go to performbetter.com. I'm going to be at Chicago and Long Beach presenting. I hope you can join me there. And honestly, their flagship in Providence probably pulls in the largest crowd. If I could, I'd go there too, because every time it's just amazing presenters. I'm just giddy that I get to stand beside some amazing individuals in this field. If you want to check out some information about myself or check out the kind of online courses that we're offering, we just launched a new one, which is open and closed chain foot mobilization. Just go to rockysnyder.com. You'll get information about that, plus weekly blogs, podcast archives, other courses and products, and even online consulting if you're interested. Be sure to join us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Click the subscribe button and enjoy the conversation. Alan, first off, welcome to the Zelos Podcast. I've been looking forward to this conversation since we touched base not too long ago.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I'm a bit reproachful, I'll say, that we were at the same event recently back in March. It was the Northwest Athletic Trainers Association's annual symposium. You were in attendance, I was in attendance, and our paths didn't cross. And I'm really bummed. After talking to you, I'm just feeling like, another brother from another mother, and parallel paths and all that. Even though we have different roles in a way, the commonalities and the thought process and everything, just like, not necessarily missed opportunity, but boy, if I could turn back the clock and grab you and sit down for lunch or whatever, I would have. So the next best thing is to get you on this podcast. So before we, like I say, follow Alan. Right? Yeah, we're doing it, man. And anytime, I'm game for. So before we follow down the rabbit hole into Wonderland in terms of what you're doing. Give us an understanding of your position at the University of Idaho and how you got to be where you are.
Yeah, so I serve as an athletic trainer on the academic side at the University of Idaho. I work in the iSmart clinic, which is it's basically an integrative care model where we work with non-intercollegiate, generally student athletes, but we have people from all across the lifespan. So we have people in their 80s and 90s come in, and we have kids come in, and so. But basically, athletics handles most of the athletic cases, and then we handle intramurals, and then people from the community, and all that other stuff that happens. Um, I got out here in 2007. I worked in a clinic and high schools and all that stuff before then when I was doing my doctoral degrees. And I came out here in 2007, and then in 2011, we had a bachelor's program out here in athletic training, and was actually in physical education with a major in athletic training. So it was kind of
Yeah.
behind the times even for that time. And so then we created the first doctorate in athletic training program in Idaho in 2011, and I really set out to create that program for clinicians who wanted to have something that they could get a terminal degree in. And so, we had academic degrees, and a lot of times you'd have an athletic trainer who was teaching in an athletic training program whose expertise was in biomechanics or exercise physiology or something that's tangential to athletic training. It's not outside of it, but it's not like in the wheelhouse. And so I thought, well, who better to train the future of our profession than people who are working on expertise in patient care? And so that's what I set out to do, along with my colleague, Jeff Sigmiller, who works at BYU. He's building a medical school now.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so we created that, and we created a master's program at the same time, professional masters, so entry to profession masters at the same time. And basically, in all that time, I was always kind of, as you know, and as you are, I was a boundary pusher. So everything that I could do to help somebody get better, I did, regardless of whether I liked it or not. And so I
Give
was
me an
always,
example. I'm
yeah.
curious about that, whether you liked it or not. What was one thing that you didn't really care for, but you did anyway?
Yeah, I would say, well, there's a lot of things that just didn't make sense. So people would say, well, in order to help this condition, and I was not helping this condition. And then somebody would say, well, in order to help this condition, you really need to look at it from this lens. And it was emotions, or it was the mental side, or it was a past life thing. And I was like, I don't even know if past lives exist. I don't know how that can be helpful. And then when somebody would show me something that I can't reconcile, instead of sticking my head in the sand, which most people would do, maybe people with more than half a brain would do, uh, I would always go, well, I can't unsee that. And so then I would go back and say, okay, well, if that is true, because I just saw it happen, and then we can repeat it, then what else are we missing? And so
Hmm.
when I built those programs, and it was, trying to teach the future of our profession, they're already credentialed athletic trainers, and I was trying to figure out, well, how do we make the best professional that we can? And we took the best of the academic doctorate and the clinical doctorate and the professional practice doctorate, and we smushed them all together, and we threw out all the BS. And so that's how we created the doctor in athletic training program. But in that program, part of my job was to study all the things that people were saying help people get better. And a lot of those had to do with things that sounded too good to be true. And I was like, well, that can't possibly be true, but let me try it. And then sure enough, it would work. And then I'd be like, okay, so now if that's true, now I have to go back through all the old stuff I thought I knew. And it just kept happening. And so then we would get further along, and you'd realize that there's a lot out there that we don't understand, and we're just basically touching the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
I was, the director of both of those programs. Then I stepped down 5 or 6 years ago and allowed other people to see what they had and do their thing here. I'm still a faculty member here. I still work in the clinic. I have a private practice. But basically my private practice now is it's confusing to me because it used to be all about pain, and I would have an agreement with my patients that I'd say, well, how would we know if you were better? And they say, if the pain was gone, I'd be fine. And then they would come back in the clinic, and I studied all these things for 10 years of how do we get pain to go away as quickly as possible. And then they come back, and I say, how's the pain? They say, it's great. How are you doing? Terrible. I'm like, wait, we had an agreement that if your pain went away, you were going to be better. So anyway, I started trying to figure out, well, what are we missing? And a lot of that was I started asking people, well, were you happy before? And they're like, not particularly. So then I started thinking about healing. Like, what is healing? Like, setting back to some previously known good point, but maybe it wasn't even good before. And,
Hmm.
and so then we started thinking about, well, what about transcending things or transformational work? And so my practice now, in my private practice, I could be working with somebody that has pain or an injury. I do a lot of performance enhancement things with golfers and baseball players and you name it. And then I also work with people in business and people that want to have a better family life. So it's basically, to me, it's all the same. And especially on the energetic side of it all, where it's a little less physical, but obviously physical things are involved. But to me, pain is the same as treating somebody's emotion, is the same as treating, um, somebody's memory from a trauma. It's all basically the same to me,
Yeah. I
which is kind of
that's
interesting. It's not how it started, but that's where it is now.
which is really quite refreshing for me because when somebody had mentioned that, oh, you've got to reach out to Alan, and because the stuff that you were sharing at the conference really resonates, reminds me a lot of the stuff that he's doing. And you guys, I think, would really hit it off. And the more you explain what you're doing, the more I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, my industry, I kind of, if I could have an analogy, it would be having a really big backyard with tall fences. And there's plenty of room,
Yeah.
plenty of space to explore that whole yard, and to the point where you could live there peacefully and for the most happy. And every now and then something flies over the fence and you just kind of forget about it. You're like, whatever, I'm just good where I am. But one day a fence post gets knocked down or a board gets loosened, and you get to look through that fence and you see that it's so much bigger, and you
Yeah.
can access it. And that's what I'm seeing is like, okay, we've got biomechanics, we got physiology, we've got pain science to some degree when it comes to physical movement and athletic performance and so on. But now we're going into another field. We're going into emotional, mental, emotional, and we can even carry over into spiritual components. We
Hmm.
can just talk about the whole of somebody's life and not just one avenue. Do you know?
Yeah.
Just so much more comprehensive.
A good example of that is somebody that comes in with Achilles tendinopathy, right? It means it hurts and it doesn't work. A lot of times we'll say tendinalgia now because that literally means it hurts and it doesn't work. Means we don't know what's wrong with it, if anything's wrong with it. But what we find out is, I've learned this over, the 30 years that I've been doing this is the body speaks in metaphors. So instead of thinking the Achilles tendon, there's something wrong with the tendon inherently, I always think about, at the same time, I think about who or what is your Achilles tendon? Or where do we feel like it's David and Goliath, right? And it's like all these metaphors start going. And so I'll ask the patient or client, like, hey, does any of this ring a bell? And I start, because the body will speak in metaphors. Or another good one is like if you have pain in the neck, then I always think, who or what is the pain in your neck? Or
Mm.
you have numbness. Where are you numb, or where would you like to be numb about things, or where can't you feel as much as you'd like to be able to feel? Or if there's a lot of pressure inside your knee, like, okay, is there any other place in your life you're feeling pressure? And then, because without, the body can only do zeros and ones, and so it's trying to point you in the right direction, but it can only do certain things. And sometimes that comes first and then the injury comes second, or sometimes we get injured and then it's like everything floods into that. So then you have some sort of work thing, and then because you got a little weak spot here and it's a it's open and attractive, then your work issue gets trapped in your knee. And we
Hmm.
can try to fix your knee all we want with physical treatments, but it's not going to do it if it's an emotion that's in there, or if it's your relationship that's in there, or
Yeah,
if it's a metaphor. So
I love it. I mean, this is something that has been on the outskirts and kind of for mainstream somewhat guffawed, like, and just kind of shaken off. But you got people like Louise Hay, who wrote a book decades ago about you can heal everything in your life. I think might have been the title or something close to that.
yeah,
We're
something
looking
like that.
at hip pain as potentially being something that is the apprehension or fear of moving forward in something. Low back is fear of something else, and like you say, neck pain could be something or someone that's actually giving you a hindrance, or it literally is somewhat of a pain in your neck. But I use these plantar pressure plates that show me how a person distributes their mass. And I
Hmm.
also look at a person's structure and find out what their posture is doing. And not to get too ethereal, too out there, or like smoke and mirrors or anything, but I often will look at their posture. And I'll give thanks to actually Tom Myers, Anatomy Trains author, because
Yeah,
doing some body reading
amazing
with
work.
him several years ago, he was saying before you actually pick apart this person, see them as a whole, and what is their posture kind of resonating with you? Give an adjective to it. And I've done that as a regular practice, and body language is pretty spot on when
Yeah.
you understand it, right? So a person's posture is an embodiment of their emotional level and their emotional state, not just their pain factors or anything else. So I guess the long-winded thing is you can't separate these. And if the way of getting into someone's structure and movement potential is through the emotional state, or is through the physical state, or another avenue, the chemical like gut state,
Yeah.
there's so many ways into it. But if somebody
And
shows me,
it might only be one pathway that's open. Or it could be that
yes,
you could do the same thing from 10 different directions, and those are the easy ones. But a lot of them are only open for one or two directions. So if you're only willing to look at the emotional stuff, but it's a physical issue, then you're in trouble that way too.
yeah, yeah. So then it becomes kind of like, I won't say trial and error, but assess, provide stimulation, and reassess. And that stimuli could come in several different forms.
Yeah, and for me it was helpful because um, I studied my athletic training background and working at a PT clinic. I studied everything I could possibly study on the physical side first. And then I would always have limitations and people that weren't getting better. And then I knew we didn't know. I think about listening to Ram Dass, who's a, kind
Uh
of a
huh.
spiritual guy from back in the 60s, but he would say, his big problem was he had all the training and he was working at Harvard and he was helping people and he knew that he didn't know. And he's like, I need to find somebody that knows. And so it's not that he didn't know anything. He just knew that he wasn't doing the best that he could. Or if that was the best, we're not doing that great. And when I look around athletic training, it's the same thing. It's like everybody thinks they know, yet there's a lot of people that aren't getting better. Um, we did a study. You said Tom Myers looking at the whole body. Another guy I look up to is Tom Delonzo Baker, and I took his courses 20 years ago, and it was amazing that he would basically say the body will tell you. You can just point where it looks interesting to you, and that's where they're holding tension. And that if you touch them there, they'll fold right around that point. And that was pretty amazing to me, like the whole body being involved in everything potentially. And so I started to see that pattern playing out. And then, so I had a really good background. Like I studied everything I could get my hands on in athletic training and physical therapy, and it just didn't do it. So then I went to the fringes of that, into chiropractic, into PTs that are doing more manipulation, and I just on and on and on. I did the Mulligan concept, which is amazing. I did
Yeah.
primal reflex release technique, which is the best neurophysiological technique out there for healing pain or for helping pain, and trauma. And then I listened to a book by Carolyn Mace where she was talking about the chakra system, and I was like, this is a bunch of nonsense. Right? Because it's just like, well, it'd be nice, but that's just not how the world works. Because if that was how the world worked, I would have known it by then. It was not like I had my eyes closed. And then by the end of the book, when somebody would talk, I would feel at my chakra where they were coming from. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And then I studied with Donna Eden and most of it from a distance. And I watched her work and I was thinking, wow, she's a miraculous human being and energy worker. And she can see all these energy systems, which I thought was total nonsense. And then the cool thing about her is not only could she see that, but she came up with a way for people to learn how to test that and measure it. And and so I loved all that. And I had my scientific background where I would say, well, here's what we're working on. Here's what I think is happening. So if I treat an emotion and they can't plantar flex their foot, and I think that's related, then we should know that it's related because now all of a sudden they can plantar flex their foot. And so I put them right back in the same test we always used. And it was really good that I had that really structured background. And then I would do Qigong, and somebody introduced me to Qigong, and I could feel meridians, and the meridians meant something different to me. And apparently I knew all that my whole life, but I didn't have any context for it. Yeah, I would have said I was good at reading body language or something. And then I realized I could talk to people on the phone and hear and feel the same thing. I'm like, well, it can't be body language. So what is that?
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a ton of really impactful people, but I've worked with really good people that are experts, like Brian Mulligan. He basically make any pain go away. Like he's like a magician with it. And then I realized, a lot of it was his confidence that he was going to be able to make that go away. And he was just going to fiddle with it until he figured out how to shut the pain off. And I thought that was amazing. And Tom DeLonzo Baker using the good side. We did a study uh, 15 years ago where we looked at Division One or two baseball players, and mostly pitchers, and most of them had glenohumeral internal rotation deficit (GERD).
Yep.
Not this kind of GERD, but the
Yep.
rotation deficit GERD. And historically, it's really difficult to treat. We say it's a tight posterior capsule, or we say the posterior structures are really tight. And so what we did in the study was we had them use their good side. And so like 18 out of 20 or something like that were the non-dominant side. And so we'd measure the rotation. And in therapy, the most common thing you do are joint mobilizations and sleeper stretch, right? That's like just it's as basic as it
It's the
gets, but
go-to. Sure.
what everybody does. You go to any baseball field across the country and people are doing the
Yep.
sleeper stretch. And so what we did is we had two groups. One of the groups we did um, total motion release, but we only did the good side. We didn't do any other joint. We didn't check the whole system. And we I think we gained on average 18 degrees of internal rotation just by doing the unaffected side. The affected side got 18 more degrees, which is unheard of. We did the sleeper stretch and the other stretching program, and we gained 2 degrees. Then what we did is we switched the groups, and the group that did the sleeper stretch now did total motion release, and they gained 18. And the
There you
group that was doing total motion release, we put in the stretching, and they lost 16 and went back down to 2.
Wow.
And so what we did is we had these two groups, and we could see that they were way different. And then we crossed them over, and then they got worse again or better. And then the one that got worse when we put them in the static stretch and the sleeper stretch, we reversed them again and put them back in the TMR, and they gained 18 degrees again. It's like, oh, wow. So doing the non-dominant side, the uninvolved side, the same motion freed up that motion on the thrown
The
shoulder.
affected side.
It was like,
Wow.
that's just, I mean, to some people that's witchcraft. Um, but I see that and go, well, that's a lot better because I knew that we didn't know how to treat it. And so now we have this other thing that we can do, and it's really easy to tell if it's going to work because you do the non-dominant side a few times, whether it's repetitions or hold, and then you recheck it. And if it's no better, then maybe you do something else. And so, when we have pitchers now, we have them always doing things on the non-dominant side.
We're just going to take a quick pause from this conversation to acknowledge our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. The Zelos Podcast is sponsored by Kinetic IQ, where intelligence meets motion. Kinetic IQ brings a biomechanics lab into the palm of your hand, letting you measure movement anytime, anywhere with just an iPad or iPhone. No wearables required. I've been using Kinetic IQ in my own practice, and whether you're screening athletes, optimizing performance, or guiding return to play, it helps practitioners like us save time, capture more objective data, and make instant actionable decisions. So to learn more about how Kinetic IQ is shaping the future of intelligent movement, visit kinetikiq.com. That's KINETIKIQ.com. At the forefront of metabolic elite is Jim Lavelle, internationally recognized clinical pharmacist, a chief science officer at Lifetime, and the co-chair for the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. He's got over 4 decades of experience and has guided Olympic athletes, professional teams, and leading health institutions. You know what makes Metabolic Elite different is their commitment to real results. Like LipidTab, their proprietary solid-state liposomal delivery system. It's a chewable format which enhances absorption like nutrients like BPC 157 and synapses. They're delivered more efficiently in the body, supporting recovery, focus, cognitive health. Their formulas go beyond the basics, solving performance health challenges at the system level. Every product is tested for quality, it's backed by research, it's trusted by athletes and clinicians alike. And you can get 10% off all of Metabolic Elite products by entering the coupon code ZELOS, ZELOS. With concepts like PRRT and reflex-based therapies, what do you say to clinicians who are like skeptical or heavily rooted into purely mechanical approaches?
Well, so like PRRT is pretty easy to justify. I mean, the thing that helped me is that on a purely scientific level and theoretical level, I had done all my training. And so I knew the science as well as they did. But I was also willing to explore other things. And so with PRRT, basically what we're trying to do is 85 to 95%. This is my language, but I learned a lot of this from PRRT. John Imes was the creator, amazing practitioner. I mean, you want to see somebody that can help somebody get rid of pain in an instant. John Imes is amazing. And basically 85 to 95% of all injuries are overreactions, not real injuries. So if you think of grade 1s, for sure, grade 0s, which means that there's something going on, but we can't even see even any sign of anything on an MRI. Grade 1s, we might be able to see the telltale signs of maybe a little inflammation, but there's no tearing. Grade 2, you start to get a little bit more tearing. But so grade 0 to early grade 2 is almost always an overreaction. Meaning
And
that
when you say overreaction,
meaning that something happened and the body freaked out and it tried to protect and it basically went on lockdown.
So it's a threat response. It's a strategy for self-preservation.
Yeah.
Because that's
so
really, that dictates almost all of our movement and, constant survival.
Yeah. And so what happens is that we compensate automatically, but we don't uncompensate automatically most of the time.
Ooh, say that again, because I think the listening audience has to hear that twice.
Yeah, so we compensate automatically. Like you'll limp automatically with an ankle sprain, but you don't always walk normally after all the pain is gone and the motion's returned.
Well said.
And so it's a protective response, but the opposite of that doesn't exist. There's no unprotective response. And so what we realize with PRRT, primal reflex release technique, is that if you, my nephew's a baseball player, and he had something going on with his shoulder, and I felt his shoulder and his infraspinatus was just had a really tight band in it. And so what you do is you put them back into external rotation to shorten that infraspinatus. That puts it on relaxation. So we shorten it. And then you reflexively fire the internal rotators. And because of the wiring that occurs at the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, the internal rotators, when they fire, they're going to reciprocally inhibit the external rotators. So now we have position that is shortening that and relaxing that, which I would call positional release therapy. If we just hold that for 2 minutes, that spasm will go away most of the time just by doing that. And then if we put them in that position and then we fire reflexively with the eyes closed, the internal rotators, now all of a sudden, maybe in 1 second or 10 seconds, that spasm goes away. And the proof of that it's an overreaction is it doesn't come back most of the time. Now, if there's an injury there and it's protecting an injury, then over time it'll come back if it gets tweaked again. But most of the time what you see is there's an overreaction, there's not really any injury. And so when we take away the overreaction, the person feels totally fine. They could go out and pitch the next day if they wanted to. But if there's an
Sure.
instability in there, we still have to treat the instability. But we can also do that through proprioception. And so a lot of the things I do with the physical body is I teach the body how to propriocept before we give mobility back and before we ever work on strength.
I think
90
it's
plus
important.
percent of the time, sorry, 90
Yeah.
plus percent of the time, a strength issue is because the joint is somewhat unstable or feels unstable. And so they can't leverage on it. And when we teach the joint to propriocept, maybe in 10 or 15 seconds, all of a sudden we retest all those muscles that tested weak and they're no longer weak. And they
Yeah.
were inhibited, they weren't weak.
Arthrokinetic reflex.
Yes. And so if we can
Yeah.
get that and we can regulate that because I've studied things like PRRT and PRRT and counter strain and there's a dozen different ways to reinstitute normal firing and clear out those pathways that have become distorted. I like to think of it as distortion, accidental
Yeah.
distortion, not the good kind
Yeah.
with rock guitar.
But it really delves so much into neurology, the nervous system, the fundamental, like the prime objective being survival and to reduce threats any means possible, where and that's going to pull us into positions that are going to actually create more threats potentially down the road, creating compromised or compensated patterns and so on. So here's the gist though, Alan. Is like it's for those that are getting into it, historically, it's been a symptom based strategy
Yeah.
where we're going to look at the site of discomfort, but without understanding the unconscious strategy that the nervous system's actually established, all you're going to be doing is kicking the can down the road. So hunting down the root causes, like the original insult potentially, or the the layers on that have built up in terms of negotiated movements.
Yeah.
Am
I
I
always
making
say that.
sense to you?
Yeah. We spend, in Western medicine, we spend nearly 100% of our time studying the straw that broke the camel's back as if it
Yes.
were more important than any other straw. And we don't even look at the camel. Like, what about the poor
No.
camel who also has experiences? And so it's like, everything's reactive. You think of drugs, 99 point something percent of all drugs are to cover up signs and symptoms, not to
Yes.
heal. And so it's that's not bad. Like if I have extreme pain and I don't know what to do with it, then yeah, that's great.
Heck
Or
yeah.
if I have an inflammatory process, getting steroids is a great idea, but also fixing whatever I'm inflamed about in my life could be useful because
In
it's
your
usually not,
life.
yeah, it's not isolated.
Underline.
Usually. Yeah.
Yes.
And so
Wow.
I remember talking or taking a course with Gray Cook, and he was the first one that I heard say, well, the thing that bothers them is usually the last thing to be working well and isn't their issue. And I was like, and now at that point, I'd been practicing for 15 years, and I was like, the Rolodex of all the people that I've seen started spinning in my head. I started thinking like, oh man, I bet you that's true. And then when we start looking at it from that lens, we'd say, okay, well, we know your knee hurts, but the idea is your knee is probably the thing that's working good. And because the other things around it aren't doing their job, now it's doing its primary job, plus this other one's secondary job, plus its tertiary job. And if we can rate, a good example of that is somebody that has back pain. Usually they've lost hip range of motion. There's a nice correlation with loss of hip range of motion
Yeah.
preceding back pain.
Yeah.
Well, if you treat back pain and you see, oh, they're getting mobility in a stable joint, well, that's never going to work. None of your strategies. And then when you muscle test somebody, every person that comes in has a weak back, but it's weak because it's being overused. And
Yeah.
so if we get the hip mobility back, then we can start to work on the lumbar stability, and all of a sudden they start playing nice together, and you're getting the compensated movement back.
Yeah, I'll often say that when people come in with knee symptoms, I'll say that's your solution. That's the way that your nervous system, your brain figured out your knee needed to do more, like what you're saying. But the solution eventually became problematic. It
Yeah,
just
exactly.
couldn't handle it anymore. So, and the other analogy, like you were
It's
saying
kind of,
about no one's paying attention to the camel. Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
the knee acting up and that being your solution is like needing motivation and punching yourself in the face. Like it's a good short-term strategy, but long-term it's a terrible one. So you
Exactly.
have to figure out how to do it differently. Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't look for you don't spend all your time on the victim of the crime. You look for the culprit. That's
Yeah.
basically it. So okay, so
Hmm.
um, you've been obviously instrumental in developing advanced education in athletic training at the university, but where do you think the profession still falls short in preparing clinicians for real world patient care? I mean, we've been talking about it
Yeah.
here, but like specifically when we're thinking
Basically
about,
everywhere. Yeah, really.
okay, don't
Like,
hold back.
yeah, I mean, and I'm proud to be an athletic trainer. I'm not always proud of where we go as our profession, how long it takes to get there. I taught
Mm,
a student years ago, and I was teaching him the mulligan concept. And he's like, well, if this was a thing, we would have known about this. I was like, yeah, that's what
ouch.
I said. And so he went back and he started looking. He's like, well, this has been in the literature for the last 15 years, and it's been a thing since 1980. I'm like, I know. And I can remember being in the clinic, working at a PT clinic, and it got poo-pooed by two-thirds of the people in there without ever trying it. And I thought, oh, isn't that weird? And then I respected them. And so then I didn't
Mm,
use it as good as I could have. And I thought,
sure.
later, I thought, man, this has been sitting there like a golden treatment in my pocket, and I just never used it because it got poo-pooed for no reason. And so I see that a lot of times in athletic training, and you have to realize that people that are wired like us in Chinese medicine, we have a lot of wood energy, which means that we'd rather run through a wall than go through a door, like lazy people use doors. Um, and so we can keep pushing long after people fatigue. And so not everybody, like when faced with something, like I can tell you 10 points, at least 10 points in my career where I got a new piece of information. I couldn't reconcile it. I knew for a fact that happened. And then I thought, well, if that's true, now I have to go back and look at all those other things that I was basing all these other assumptions on.
Yeah,
And the
I
reality
hear
is
that.
most people are not willing or able to do that because they have jobs, they have a life, they're feeling overworked, they're near burnout. They just can't handle reformatting their practice. And so
Mm,
so most people just are not willing to go outside of their little box because their head will explode. And for a wood energy, our head explodes. We're like, wow, that was pretty cool. I wonder what's going to happen next time. It's like that kind of thing. So I think certain people are more wired to push the envelope and explore uncharted. The archetype is the pioneer or the warrior. And so, like when we created the DAT, it's like, well, you're going to get a lot of arrows going up the hill. And I'm like, yeah, I love arrows. It's like that kind of thing.
Right on. Well, you've worked to bridge like the evidence-based practice with real clinical outcomes, but how do you balance the research and for lack of I'm going to use the word intuition, but I really don't
Mhm.
really, I don't,
That's
I don't
fine.
like intuition, but we're going to use it anyway, just because we understand it. But how do you balance research, intuition, and patient response in your decision-making process?
Yeah. I mean, research in essence is not super helpful early on. And like, I'll give you an example. We have
Yeah,
more evidence of the survival of consciousness after death than we have for basically anything in athletic training being helpful. And it's because it's new, and you got people like Gary Schwartz, and every major research institution across the country has some sort of study on this thing, and they have major labs, and they've studied psychic mediums. They've done all sorts of stuff, and it's like, whoa, wait a second, they're a thing. Like the research is so good and rigorous that there's no doubt that these things are things. Where in athletic training, most of the research hasn't really progressed, and so we haven't really gotten as far as PT is the same way. Um, PT is a little different. They're always like, well, show me the evidence and I'll do it. But the problem is, Sackett, the guy who came up with the term evidence-based practice, if you read his original article, he said his biggest fear was going to be that people started relying too much on the evidence that existed and not enough on what they were creating. And
excellent.
and so he would call that the fear of evidence only practice. But really, evidence comes from intuition, it comes from your clinical experience, it comes from your clinical judgment, and then it also comes from the best of the evidence. And that's evidence informed practice, as I like to see it. Um, but it's so how I balance that and how I teach my students to balance that is you're going to get to a certain point in an evaluation where you have all of your problem list and you're like, that's all I could find. I know that they have limited range of motion here. This muscle test doesn't work. They have pain going up the stairs, blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, okay, I have 57 treatment options I can do. And 30 of them to me are kind of similar. So now I'm guessing which one is going to be the best. That's a great time to use your intuition because you're guessing anyway. And
Yeah.
so then I would say, okay, let's say I'm going to do PRRT or positional release therapy. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know. Let me just think about doing PRRT. It feels pretty nice to think about. Think about PRT. That doesn't feel quite as good. If I'm guessing anyway, I'm going to go with the one that feels more confident to me. And so I started doing that kind of thing where I knew I was guessing anyway. And so then once you make a decision, you're still tracking the same markers. And after I do that treatment, I go back and test all the things I had before. Um, and you got to understand, I've, uh, I'm not proud of it or not proud of it, but I've published probably more than 100 articles. And so I know the foibles of research.
Hmm.
I when I was doing my dissertation, I called the five seminal articles. People that wrote the articles, and they said, "Ugh, don't trust what I wrote exclusively because I was just trying to get tenure." And but I realized that like we've never done it like that. But for every variable you're measuring, there's hundreds of variables that you either can't measure or you don't know how to measure.
Mm,
And so then
yeah.
that's why if you look at eggs, are they good for you or are they bad for you? Well, you got 500 of each article and then every day it's changing. And it's because you're
And
only studying one or two things at a time.
there's also that element that you don't know what to measure either. You're not aware of
Yeah.
other things in the overall big picture that are just not in your conscious. So the word intuition, the reason why I trip up on it is because uh, really I go along with like Malcolm Gladwell and Blink and how it is an accumulation of everything we have experienced and we take into our unconscious, and that unconscious has a hard time communicating with the conscious mind. So instead, it gives us this feeling, this kind of sensation, and we just call it intuition, when in fact, it's actually information that is just having a hard time getting up to the frontal lobe. So,
Yeah, and it's interesting because yeah, even I would say that well, that's even limited too if I catch your drift right, because we're essentially radio antennas. And so the random thoughts and feelings that you have in the course of a day might be yours, but there's a pretty good chance that they're Bob sitting next to you or your family members, and you're picking it up on the radio waves.
mhm.
So there's a guy, his name's Rupert Sheldrake. He's a physicist of some kind or other, but he basically talked about the morphogenetic field of thought, and that around every thought there exists this field of energy that attracts that thought. And the bigger the field and the more connection you have to that field, the more likely it is going to be to affect you. Well, now we're not talking about X's and O's so much, right? And it's like, wait a second. And so a good example of that is breast
Tuning
cancer.
fork. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, breast cancer, right? That it has a huge morphogenetic field of thought and it's almost exclusively negative. And so you start wearing a pink ribbon and you're like, whoa, but it has a negative field. And if I have a connection with that, there's a pretty good chance when I wear that ribbon, it's going to remind me of something negative, and that's what's feeding into my system.
Ah,
Versus something like love might be 50-50. Some people love the idea of love and some people it turns them off, or God, right? Um, and so there exists a field of thought around things. So sometimes you're getting information, but it's actually coming from somebody else's thought. And once you realize that, then the random things in your life are just things you don't have context for.
huh.
And so that really tripped me up. And the way I learned that one, because I was having a hard time with that, and I had a patient who knew everything. Like her eyes would be closed, and I'd have my hands above her, and she'd say, "Okay, well, the reason you're doing that is because you're connecting my right brain and my left brain." Or she'd be laying on the table, and she'd go, "Well, the reason you're thinking about dogs is because of this." And I'm like, "How'd you know I was thinking about dogs?" And how did I know that you were thinking about something? And then I picked it up and I just thought it was random. And so it was really interesting. Like that just knocked down a lot of walls because I couldn't unhear that. Like
Yes.
like she knew what I was thinking, but the funny thing is I knew what she was thinking, but I just dismissed it as random because it's just like when we do EMG, we get all these signals and all these other signals we don't want, we call them noise and we filter them out. Well, the brain does the same thing. That the human brain left brain can pay attention to 4 to 6 things a second. The right brain can pay attention to billions of things a second. And so when we put somebody under hypnosis, we might ask them, "Well, what do you remember?" And they're like, "Well, I remember these things happening." And it was maybe a handful. Then we put them under hypnosis and we say, "Okay, so what do you remember?" And they spend the next 4 hours detailing everything that they were aware of at the time that consciously they had no place for because they filtered it out as noise and it never hit their conscious mind. Because if everything that came into your awareness got processed by your conscious mind, we'd be visiting you a couple times a week in a very special place. So it's really hard for the human brain to reconcile all that, or reconcile that the wall's not really a wall, it's just a bunch of photons behaving like a wall. And if you knew that for a fact, and when you saw a wall, you saw it vibrating and you knew you could put your hand through it at some level, it's hard to figure out when to get coffee with somebody. Like it's like your whole world starts to fall apart because none of the rules apply. So,
I honestly knew we would go here. We would reach the depths of Wonderland in the rabbit
yeah,
hole. Thank you, Alice. Oh my gosh, this is
yeah.
wonderful. Uh,
But the interesting thing is, so that's far out. But what all that did was it stretched me out enough that now the things that years ago were out there for me, I'm really comfortable with because it's just quantum physics or it's just, Chinese medicine. They've known that for 4,000 years. And so it didn't really like that doesn't bother me so much anymore.
Yeah.
But it even bothered Einstein. Like he's like, you're telling me if I'm not looking at the moon, it doesn't exist. Like that bothers me. But the idea is, well, what if other people are looking at it? Right? So then you don't
Yeah.
have to be looking at it at all times. Somebody has to be looking at it. I don't know if that's true, but that makes sense to me that there's a lot of co-participation going on in life when we think we're all just living it individually. It's way bigger than that.
Certainly. Yeah. And sometimes we just chalk it up to coincidence, but we just haven't been able to measure it. And
Yeah, and you
once
don't
we
have the
can measure
context
it,
either.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whew. That was so deep. Oh my gosh. But I loved it and I knew we were going to get there. So, how about this? We're kind of going up against the clock now. I've
Yeah.
got some rapid fire questions. They're not as deep, but they're kind of fun nonetheless. Are you up for them?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Structure or the nervous system? What drives outcomes more?
Nervous system.
Assessment or treatment? Which matters more?
Treatment as assessment.
Oh, nice. Hands on or hands off care?
Depends on the person.
One clinical mistake you see all the time.
Not listening.
The most underrated tool in rehab.
The nervous system.
All right. How about speed of results or long term change?
Both.
What confuses young clinicians the most?
That the obvious thing isn't always the issue. So somebody
Hmm.
points to the knee, it's not really a knee sometimes. It's like that's very
Sure.
confusing for people. Yeah.
Okay. One habit that makes a great clinician.
Curiosity combined with reflection.
Beautiful. If something isn't working, what's your first adjustment?
Assume user error.
Oh, good. Okay. And one word that defines effective patient care.
Outcomes.
Wow. Those were great. They weren't necessarily what I was thinking. So it's great because it gives me a different perspective, which I can learn from. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
what's
that.
funny is I could argue both sides of a lot of those things, but like seeing what I've seen and working with students all the time, man, some of those are good questions. Yeah. It depends on the person too. I'm like, I don't know. It depends who we're talking about. So that's
All
awesome.
right. Again, aside from my go-to question at the end as to how people can learn more about you, maybe follow you with your research articles, or just get in touch, or whatever. Before you give me that information, what I'm really curious is, are you aware of other universities that have a progressive mindset like you and your department?
No, I've never seen anything like it. And so like in our courses, our master's and our doctoral program, I teach intuition and I teach how to work with patients and I teach some of the things that are more fringe. Like everybody will know when somebody says something, whether it feels true to them or not by the time they graduate. But however, we teach courses and continuing ed courses on Mulligan concept and total motion release and primal reflex release technique and counter strain and myokinesthetics. Like we do all these things that are actually seen as advanced therapies. But for me, it's really the toolbox of every person graduating should come out with understanding of how to use these things. And so I think that's what we do that's special. And then we really talk about the patient and not the pathology. And sometimes they're very similar and sometimes they're pretty divergent. And we're just trying to
Mm,
help people feel better and get the most out of their life, live their best
beautiful.
life. Yeah.
Dude, I love it. I love it. Alan, I can't thank you enough. This has been
Yeah,
great.
it's
So
fun.
I know you've got a LinkedIn page. Do you or your department have Instagram posts or anything like that?
Yeah, the University of Idaho athletic training programs page. And then my personal stuff is Resource Energetics, all one word, and you can find that website there too. And that kind of links into the other side of things. Really, they're all kind of combined, but it's just easier for people to sort them out.
Wow. Well, I'm going to have to sort out this conversation. I'm going to have to play it back and really
Yeah,
go
at
into it
some point
deeper. It
I
was
want to
great.
I want to reverse this because I got a lot of more questions for you. And so I kind of feel bad because I hate these things because I'm always like talking this way, but I'd rather be on the other end of it. So
we'll make that happen another time for sure. And maybe off camera. But
yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, perfect. Take care. Well, Alan sure didn't disappoint. I want to thank him for coming on, being my guest. I would love to have a 2-hour podcast with him. If time persists, it allows, maybe it will come back on another time. I want to thank the University of Idaho for allowing this to happen. And don't forget, the Perform Better training summits are coming to you in Chicago, Long Beach, and Providence, June, July, and August, respectively. Check out my website, rockysnyder.com. And until next week, we're going to hear one more announcement from our valued sponsors. Go out there and make it a good one. Remember to check out metabolicelite.co. Check out all the products they have on their website. Synapsin Pro is something I've been using to help stay focused without having to over-caffeinate myself. It keeps me in the zone so I can just really hone in on the things I need to achieve without feeling like, man, I gotta reach for an energy drink every 5 minutes. metabolicelite.co. And don't forget, Kinetic IQ. They've got markerless motion capture for morons like me. I can use their product with my iPhone or my iPad. I can look at posture analysis, movement analysis of any exercise, gait analysis. It gives me everything I could possibly want when tracking people's movements. So, check out kineticiq.com.